those watching, I'm the small person at the end of the room. Very large conference table here. This is the first in our spring semester Beyond the Web series of salons. And to explain Beyond the Web, in many ways, the web has been this fabulous thing, the internet. The internet's protocol is TCP/IP. The web grew on top of HTTP on top of that. That is a protocol. And all kinds of wonderful decentralized, democratizing and distributed and empowering things are supposed to happen with the web, and to a large degree they have, except a lot of this has happened inside the enclosures that Apple and Google and Facebook and now Meta and others have done. In other words, the worldwide commons, and we study the commons here at the Oster workshop, that was the internet, is many privately controlled commons that are really wonderful. They feel good. You can do lots of stuff in them, but they are not people operating on their own out in the world and out in the marketplace. Those of us, and there's some on this call and many more who are going to show up and have been working on this for some time. Joyce is one, I'm another, some others I can't read yet up there are as well, have been involved in digital identity. And it's often said about digital identity that the internet is missing an identity layer. This is something that Kim Cameron, late of Microsoft and of Earth, said 20 years ago, and that the internet needed an identity layer that was good for everybody. I think it's missing a commerce layer. It's missing a transaction and relationship layer that I think Beckn fits. And we have with us the prime mover behind Beckn, Sujith Nair, and
Hi.
I know your name, and I'm also trying to read it, and it's a little out of range. I brought this visual prosthesis, which is an iPad that ran out of gas before I look at it, so I could study up close. So I'll turn it over to Sujith, who was also behind Adhar, and I want to bring up Adhar because we hope that Beckn will grow more or less on the curve that Adhar did, and it's now at 1.35 billion people, and that's some of people living in India. This is extremely significant to me anyway. Exceeds the population of Europe if you include Russia and Turkey, and it exceeds the population of North and I think South America together. So this is significant, and this is, I think, in some ways the North American introduction for this. So take it away. Tell us what Beckn's about.
Thank you, Doc. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. Hello, everyone. So for some of you, it's early good morning. It's amazing to see the audience spread, as Doc tells me, all the way from New Zealand to America. So delighted to be here. And thank you, Doc. So I do want to talk about this little journey with Beckn that we've been having so far. And if you guys okay, I'll probably just bring up a few sort of slides, just a few frame of thoughts to sort of get this a short Beckn explainer of sorts, but I'm really looking forward to the larger set of questions and interactions we would have. So I'll try and probably keep this to 15 minutes or 20 minutes, Doc. Is that okay? Would that be good enough?
Sure.
Great. Yeah. So what I normally do when I talk about this is to sort of start with the broader philosophy, obviously largely in line with what Doc was mentioning about the things that the internet as it was, which seems like a long time ago now, did not have in terms of identity or a commerce layer. I normally start with that sort of a premise, but I think what I'll do this time is to talk about the story that's happening on ground in the city of Bangalore with Beckn Protocol. And I'll probably explain that a little bit. And from there, probably an attempt to sort of go behind the hood and under the hoods and see how exactly does the idea of Beckn come into play in an implementation like that. And then probably touch upon the broader sort of the philosophical or the larger thinking behind why we are doing what we're doing with Beckn. And then talk about some of the other things that are happening with Beckn in India and some of the conversations we're picking up outside of India. And then probably I'll leave it to the floor to sort of have some discussions, answer any questions. I know that I have to keep my chat box active. But feel free to stop me, ask me any questions at any point. I think that seems to be normally how we take this conversation forward, as Doc tells me. So looking forward to all the questions, and thank you so much once again. So yeah, without much ado, let me get started. The story that I want to talk about first is, of course, this little implementation that we're doing in Bangalore, in India, where we have these really passionate bunch of auto rickshaw drivers. The auto rickshaws are those three-wheeler tuk-tuk public transport vehicles that you see in many parts of India and probably even Southeast Asia. So we have this driver community which have been over a decade or so using a bunch of ride-hailing apps, all the popular ones that you can think of, Uber, Ola. Ola is probably more Indian. Uber, of course, has been there much before. I think they've been using these apps and sort of have learned to live with the reality of digital ride hailing and that as the norm in how they kind of run their livelihoods in today's world. But here's a fascinating story of how they could come together and understand Beckn all by themselves and reach out to us, reach out to the larger community that Beckn belongs to right now. We're calling it the Beckn-enabled Collective, and put this idea together of having somewhat of their own platform, a sort of a user-owned platform, and they could take help from a fascinating tech company in Bangalore, which has been doing some pioneering work in the area of payments and others, wherever India has done some similar story with digital public infrastructure, the company called JustPay. So they could help build sort of a software as a solution platform to get the drivers onboarded onto the sort of the digital arena and make them available by their own set of rules and features and controls, including pricing, how they allocate the rides as that come through to across the driver pool, all that, and go live. What's fascinating is the story started off in November. And since then, with little or no marketing or any sort of a big advertisements to get customers to start using some of these apps to get used to finding auto rickshaw drivers through this platform. Without any of that, we are able to see in just about 2 months effort about from the rides going up all the way to 6,000 rides per day. And it's fascinating how this story sort of embodies some of the essential ideas behind what Beckn Protocol does. And here are some of the stats. Obviously, these numbers for a city like Bangalore is extremely small. We're talking about a city which has a population of 13 million, with people going in and going out about 40 to 50 million transit population. So these numbers are barely there in terms of the amount of users or rides or the number of drivers you can get. But the fact that this sort of happening on the ground almost as a sort of a digital cooperative model where the drivers themselves are able to sort of beckon their own sort of destiny and sort of define their own rules and restore their own agency and autonomy. As I thought it was a good, fascinating story, as a good place to start explaining what Beckn is all about. Now, as I explained through Beckn, you'll see that this is not just another ride-hailing platform as you'd normally be familiar with, but there's a lot more happening under the hood, and that's something that I can explain. I'll try and not get into any of the deep technical details of this implementation. Maybe I can answer the questions if anybody is interested. But I think the whole idea, therefore, is to sort of reflect on what is the problem that we are trying to recognize and how Beckn is helping solve that problem, and how is that specifically solving for areas, sectors like ride-hailing, commerce, hyperlocal, e-commerce, etc. Yeah. Now, talking about platform model, I know that this is sort of a very sort of heavily used term. A platform normally gets conflated into many interpretations, but for the context of this conversation, I'll probably keep platform more as a marketplace, which facilitates a digital infrastructure acting out as an online marketplace, which facilitates any kind of third-party interactions. It could be two-party, multi-party, but largely in a typical transaction economy, we're looking at a consumer provider sort of an interactions happening on a platform. And that's what I refer to as platforms here, as a two-sided marketplace, to keep it simple. And sort of also dwell upon how, while it does many fantastic things as I've done, literally becoming the commerce layer that was missing in the design of internet, but also how does it and how did it end up creating some of these what I call as the digital unfreedoms, and how does that solving for that would be necessary in the times we live in, especially with the whole livelihoods dependent on it and the kind of things that we hear about. That's kind of a common conversation sentiment across the world that as I could discover in my visits to Europe and other places. Now, I think we all know about platforms. It's fundamentally about how do you literally, bring speed and scale into the play and rapidly scale up to be the number one and number two, so that there is so the number threes and all the follow are pretty much become insignificant. How you continuously sort of gain disproportionate rewards by putting in capital and rapidly scaling up and doing that at a breakneck speed. That's pretty much the story of the rage of platforms. We've seen how that shaped the whole commerce layer in the digital economy in the last 2.5 decades. And I think if I were to look at it, there are two fundamental concepts at play. One is, of course, the whole this whole software engineering evolution, the whole architectural sort of evolution of how you think about computer systems and opening them not as just one single purpose application, but more as a multi-purpose infrastructure enabling many new possibilities, innovations to happen, something which can rapidly evolve, have a shape-shifting form. There are these closed feedback loops that you learn and adopt and bring more and more services and applications on a single sort of an infrastructure. That's the great software engineering evolution that we have seen with the whole platform model and with cloud and 4G and 5G and all coming in. This has only just got accentuated and penetrated deeply into pretty much every realm of digital as we talk today. That, and when you combine that with this whole aggregation model, and I talk about aggregation as look at a vast fragmented ecosystem of supply and demand. And if you can get both sides, the consumers and providers, put yourself in the center as that platform intermediary, bringing them together and combining that with this whole fast shape-shifting, very nimble, quick on innovation kind of an infrastructure like platforms, combining together to give you that speed and scale. So that's how these platforms have literally sort of cracked the code and have been growing the way they've been growing. So one, of course, it did bring a lot of convenience, efficiency. I don't think you would think of not doing hailing rides without a digital medium today, or for that matter, ordering many of the things that we normally buy on a day-to-day basis. Things have become a lot more convenient and easy. And they're fundamentally because of the fascinating features of the platforms in the form of being rapidly scalable, ability to adapt. You can take a Uber from San Francisco and quickly adapt it to a city like Bangalore, understand some bit of the context and enable that. For example, when Uber came to India, they realized that digital payments was not so as penetrated as it is today. So how do you enable cash collections? Probably one of the things that they innovated quickly, added it to the platform, while maintaining the overall globalness, if I were to use the word, of the platform intact. And that kind of a massive flexibility that platform brings gave them huge amount of advantage. But what it also does, as we all know, the fact that you have this, what I call the double incidence of presence, where both the consumer and provider stay on the same platform. They sort of create this cyclical value loops, where you're actually storing the value of the interaction and platform really enriching itself with all those interactions and adding more and more value, creating kind of a strong moat for itself. And this whole store of value model makes them far more powerful, driving all the network effects that they can, literally creating new behavior models, new market structures. And I think got to give it to the platform model in the way they have formalized sort of the informal economy in some sense, especially the service economy, where you have, for example, if you look at any kind of the hyper-local economy, whether it's drivers, local groceries, etc., the ability to formalize and make it convenient was great. But I think it also created a few issues, which I thought is important to understand. One is the fact that I think clearly there is a systemic design issue that I normally talk about that comes with coincidence of presence, the fact that you can acquire only so many users, consumers, and providers on a single platform as a sole lone hero, that approach that you take, and that clearly says that there cannot be one platform for a sector solving for an entire country or an entire place, whether it's Bangalore as a city, as an ecosystem, or India as a country. There cannot be just one platform solving for that, as much as they aspire to be that. I don't think it's really scalable that way, because it kind of takes enormous amount of effort, capital, and other things to bring everybody on board, which is shown in the real, the real data of how e-commerce is penetrated in a country like India. We are a country which with 350 million people, 300 million people use digital payments through their mobile phones, and yet only 40 to 45 million people, or sometimes 100 million people, do shopping online. So e-commerce penetration is as low as 6 to 7%. The digital ride hailing is probably even lesser. It's probably less than 3%. I mean, the whole of the three big ride hailing platforms like Uber, Ola, or Rapido combined is about 4.5 million rides a day. And that's probably less than what Delhi Metro does in one city, in Delhi. So the fact that we think that they are hyperscalable and all that, it's not just enough for them to kind of have this deep penetration going in their favor. And of course, the other thing which happens, which is something that I want to, which is very important that we all talk about, is it creates this whole political economy. Now, it's very interesting, the whole relationship between the platform and the users of the platform, whether you take the supply side, like drivers on one side, of the users, especially between the providers and the platform. They are not partners. They don't have an employee-employee relationship. Neither are they partners. So there's this sort of an unequal relationship in power structure that exists. And it's almost like you're a boss, but you're not my boss formally, sort of an equation, which sort of takes away the agency autonomy for the provider, especially if you're a small hyper-local gig economy kind of a worker. It takes away a lot of that control. It usurps all the power, but doesn't really add value beyond a point. At the same time, what's interesting is these drivers continue to use the platform because they've just gotten into that habit, and clearly they don't think that they have a choice not to use it. So you have this sort of a very intriguing relationship that's evolving and staying together, but clearly there is that little bit of a rift that is there, and we can see that sentiment not just in India but across the world. And those are some of the other things that this platform model suffers from. Yeah, and just to touch upon the political economy, and since I use the word digital unfreedom, just a few examples how this literally creates problems, the unfreedoms for the users of the platform. When I talk to the drivers, they say that, I must have probably used, I must be working on Uber platform or Ola platform or any of these platforms like Amazon for several years, delivering cellular orders, fulfilling several orders, got a fantastic reputation or a rating score on that, which literally acts as my currency to be up in the pecking order and get more business. But if I were to choose to leave the platform and go to another platform, I don't get the data for my own benefit. I have to literally scratch from scratch. So those and several other loss of pricing power, literally loss of any kind of agency, is sort of those digital freedoms that have come to being. While at the same time, you have these efficiencies and this extremely convenience that the platform drives. So it's kind of a very odd trade-off that we have between solving for convenience and efficiency vis-a-vis digital freedom. And that's an interesting tension or tussle. I'm not too sure if that can always be balanced, and we can serve both sides always in equal measure. But this little interesting tension is something that I see as an emergent sort of a concern, or some kind of a thing that we need to be conscious about, worried about when you talk about a two-sided marketplace with some kind of this kind of lopsided political economy happening. Now, how do we sort of address this problem? So one of the ways that we thought we can probably enable solving or thinking of solving is to bring that one missing piece in this whole conversation, which was the central feature of the web itself, which is something that we seem to have abdicated in this whole rush of digital economy that we have seen in the last few decades, which is the element of interoperability. Yeah, so all our core internet systems fundamentally are interoperable. The fact that, I could be on any email platform and send to a receiver who could be on any other email platform, not necessarily deal with this coincidence of presence or having be on the same platform to talk to each other The whole web is designed in such a manner. Our whole telecom network, most of the core systems, as you see, are fundamentally interoperable. Now, as we can see, the interoperability does allow for more choices. It allows for choices on both sides, but fundamentally, it also drives faster adoption. So the problem that we are facing in India, where you have very low penetration of access to commerce, and this whole concentration and lopsided political on the economy, I think somewhere we think bringing that interoperability as some of the key element, a key feature in how we shape or reimagine economy, commerce on internet is something that I thought would be an interesting sort of a lever direction to look at when we thought of Beckn. So I think what essentially Beckn does is to look at this model that we have today, this edifice where you have consumers and providers. And I'll probably stick to ride hailing as an example, but probably you can take this model and apply it to any of the consumer provider interactions we see in commerce, healthcare, etc. But keeping with ride hailing as an example, you have this model where the platform is only one small part of the larger system that is in play. You have the drivers who bring in their own cars, their own assets, pay for the fuel, do all kinds of pay for the insurance and everything. They just use this digital medium of a platform to sort of get connected and access demand. But what happens as a platform is, given that you're working in silo, and you're although there are other platforms and other transit systems, especially mobility, available, you choose to be this lone hero in a winner-take-all sort of agenda, and you're trying to solve for scale, solve for convenience, and solve for wider access. But inherently, what happens is you're taking up the whole systemic risk onto that one platform. Everything that system needs, and system is sort of much bigger than just the one single piece of platform, where you have to acquire customers, acquire providers, solve for the liquidity of demand and supply to keep the business model sustainable, and solve for the interactions between the consumer and the provider, the entire order lifecycle. Probably this little picture, I'm not sure if it's clearly visible on screen, but the entire order lifecycle, from searching for something, finding it, placing an order, booking and paying for it, tracking, rating, complaining, the entire interaction is kind of logged in, and you're solving for that as a single platform for the entire system, which clearly inherently absorbs a lot of the systemic risks. And what therefore we can think of as an alternative, and then going back to the design of the very internet or any open networks like the email systems, if we were to unbundle this sort of model and distribute the sort of this risks and costs, and even the incentives across a wider ecosystem, bringing in a larger participation from the ecosystem in participating in one sort of this whole distributed decentralized network, and where instead of a platform which was trying to play on both ends and incurring cost and taking risk on both sides and creating sort of this lopsided political economy, what we can probably now look at with this model, attempt to look at this model, is sort of distribute that, where one platform is also one side, whatever they're good at, and it doesn't sort of allow them to conserve power in any form or create any kind of a distorted political economy. And you have these interactions facilitated through very simple protocols, which pretty much was the sort of the bedrock of the design of internet, but a protocol that is more commerce aware, which understands consumer provider interactions, keeps it very decentralized, peer-to-peer, and sort of unbundle this need to be on everything happening on the same platform and distribute it across a wider platforms. And as you can see, intuitively, that as a driver, I'm not dependent on the same platform to help me acquire rides. I can acquire rides through multiple platforms who have an incentive to generate transactions as part of their business model and keep their customers happy. So that sort of creates sort of a win-win interaction in some sense, and reduces the risks on both sides. What it also does, it allows the drivers or any provider to have a choice to not lose out on this access to demand, access to these business orders, and have this ability to port itself from one platform to other, where the demand remains largely the same because you are naturally discoverable whichever platform you're on, and sort of allow yourself that freedom. solving for one little freedom, unfreedom of solving for choice or lack of choice to giving the choice, and also create a network level sort of a reputation and scoring as your sort of credentials, and you can move that too as you move from one platform to the other. So it kind of solves for a few things, like solving for some of these unfreedoms I spoke about, and also interestingly, it could potentially solve for the market expansion and widening access. And this is not something that we sort of just thought of it purely as a pure systemic abstract concept. But this is something that as a founding team of FIDE, we are able to do it in the area of payments, not so much in the area of commerce, but in payments, we have done something similar into creating a decentralized peer-to-peer payments, which is going huge in India. It got launched in 2016 through this name. It was called UPI, Unified Payment Interface. And today it does about 8 billion transactions a month. And suddenly we could go from a digital penetration of 3% to about 300 million people using digital payments in India across the country. So this sort of unbundling and redistribution of risks, costs, and incentives sort of creates an opportunity even for the platforms to have some sort of a better business model, and also solves for some of these unfreedoms I was talking about. And to make this unbundling happen, obviously you need to find a way where you have a uniform sort of a language for platforms to communicate each other, have these order lifecycle interactions between two disparate platforms without having any prior knowledge of each other's existence, naturally discover them and start having this conversation. And that's where Beckn fits in. So fundamentally, Beckn is nothing but a bunch of open specifications, which sort of protocolizes what a typical shopping experience on an Amazon or an Uber would do, translate that order lifecycle into a bunch of specifications. And if all participating platforms adopt these specifications, you don't have to worry about how many platforms you have to integrate with. You just implement this one specification and everybody gets connected as a common grid, just like the electricity grid on a common energy and other transmission ratings. This was an effort that we started off in 2018. We open sourced it immediately. We just launched version 1. It went through this 2 years of implementations, and the 1.0 that just got launched at the end of last year sort of is battle hardened with some of the early experiences we're seeing in mobility and other areas. But we do also have a thriving open community which does that. I think it's probably well past 20 minutes. I've taken more time than required, but one easy way to look at Beckn is think of it as a digital rail that allows for this trusted, low cost, peer-to-peer consumer provider interactions and make it platform agnostic in some sense. And we're also seeing some kind of an innovation happening on that, combinatorial innovations where you can bundle two different experience, like buying coffee and booking a car, and bring them together as part of one unified experience, for example. And that's why help local businesses have a lot more sort of freedom to do business online and participate in the digital economy. Yeah, so what we're seeing today is things has gone beyond mobility to grocery delivery through this big national initiative called as ONDC, where some of the big and small platforms are joining, with government also blessing it, Government of India. We're going through all these sectors. We're also getting into spaces like EV charging and telehealth, healthcare. Healthcare especially I'm very interested about, because rural access to telehealth is a big problem in countries like India. And if you can solve for that, where a doctor is sitting in any part of the world and helping you offer teleconsultation, and not necessarily both having to be on the same platform, is something that I think is a very fascinating use case to look at. We're also seeing early traction in the area of access to social justice and others, but these are some of the early areas where Beckn is finding some adoption. Yeah, I mean, that was probably the last one from my end. So with that, yeah, I'll hand it over back to Doc. Doc, thank you.
Thank you. This is great. We actually have some chat questions already. Neil Thompson is asking about distilled payments, and if there's a pointer. Daniel Harris is asking UPI, UBI payment system in India. Does anybody have a link? Can you address those?
Sure. Yeah, I think, sorry for my bad pronunciation, it's digital payments. So UPI is Unified Payment Interface that with RBI's push, there's a payment corporation in India called National Payment Corporation of India, which is a public utility for payments, launched this sort of specifications and could bring different market players, including Google's and WhatsApp, to act as the user experience interface for customers to link their bank accounts, whichever bank where the bank they have the account, to link it with some fascinating third-party user apps and use that to transfer money to anybody. You can transfer money instantly in India within a few seconds, probably less than 2 seconds, and this has sort of taken off in a big way since it's launched in 2016. We're doing about 8 billion transactions per month. I think you'll find the information on this at the NPCI website. I'm just going to quickly put it here and also bring some of the links from maybe a little later or as we speak about the statistics around UPI from the same website as a more accessible link for you. But I hope that helps explain what UPI is.
I'm curious, how do you collect, you said it's 8 billion transactions. How are those collected? If it's all very as distributed as it is, how does reporting work? Is there some central entity that's collecting the data? And how is privacy or anything within that?
No, I think great question. So I think the way the UPI works is obviously independent of UPI, you obviously need to have a bank account with the bank. It's an independent banking relationship you have. Let's say I have a bank account with a local bank here, say ICICI. I can transfer money in 2 ways in India now. I can log into whatever digital interfaces the bank itself provides, like an ICICI net banking interface or the ICICI mobile app. It could be a little tedious if you were to sort of do some of those legacy banking way of transferring money. You have to add a person's account. You got to know the entire details and then wait for 30 minutes for it to be activated and then transfer money. And it works in a certain way at a certain time. Now with UPI, what can happen is you have these many private tech companies, some of them literally born and become unicorn with UPI. They have come and said, I can offer a better bank agnostic payment experience where I've got nothing to do with the bank. So you can download my app. So some of the famous popular apps in India are PhonePe. Let me just type it down here. It's a bit of Hindi, English combined. PhonePe. Then you have Google Pay. I don't think Google probably does payments anywhere else in the world, but Google, they've launched the payment interface here, where you have these apps and I can download it as a banking user, link any banking account to this app, and that app then sort of gets the permission to connect back to the bank wherever the account is, and through the protocol in a very private, secure way, issued instructions, advice to debit money and credit money in another bank of the receiver. The entire transaction is largely P2P, where in a sense that it goes from the payment API app, third-party payment API like PhonePe, gets an authentication access permission from the bank, and then the money instruction goes via NPCI UPI switch. So NPCI acts as the router in the whole interaction, and then it goes to the receiver's bank and then updates the receiver's UPI app wherever the receiver has sort of linked the account with. It could be a Google Pay on the other side and have transactions. So you have about 200 plus banks already interacting, about 30, 40 such apps. You don't have to really know anything about the banking details of the other person, the account details of the other person. If you have what is called as a UPI address or a phone number. UPI address is basically like the email address in the SMTP protocol, just like how we type emails, something similar. All you have to know is that payment address. You don't even have to know which bank, what kind of a bank account the person has as a receiver. You can transfer money. And what's interesting is that during COVID, when there was a lockdown and migrant laborers were literally out of any sort of livelihood and were going back to their villages, Government of India, through this payment address mechanism, a similar construct like UPI, and using Aadhaar as an ID, could immediately transfer $300 million to $400 million instantly. It was fastest benefits payment during the time of COVID happened anywhere. That doesn't ever happen anywhere else in the world. So it's kind of this instant payment through a bank agnostic payment address, which is interoperable. is sort of how the UPI story took off in India. And it's all mobile payment. So you just need to have a mobile phone with a camera to scan a QR code, or just have the address typed in and just send the money.
No, I don't see if any hands are up, but I do see Michael Grossman asks how intermediaries make money. Are there fees to buyer or seller? It seems to me that you've got really with the protocol, correct me if I'm wrong, you have a framework in which there can be many intermediaries of many different kinds of business. And so each of them are free to make money in whatever way they want. I would suppose, so it would probably follow certain patterns. So maybe you can unpack that a little.
Yeah, so as a UPI, as an infrastructure, the Reserve Bank here, the central bank here has kept it free. The third-party apps, they could have charged the users for using this, but the way they're playing this game is to not charge them anything, but bring users onto their platform to do a bunch of other use cases, like paying for electricity bills, paying for any kind of other utility bills, or seeking loans based on your payment history and ledger and bunch of other things. So it's kind of activated a whole new sort of a fintech business model on top of it. And that's where they've been able to, help. So the fact that if you reduce friction in payments sort of formalizes the economy much faster, and you can layer a whole sort of opportunities out of that. For a country to go from, say, a few 150 million transactions a month to 8 billion transactions a month in a matter of 8 years, sort of formalizes a whole lot of things that comes as a second order effect. And that's what UPI could do. And some of these third-party apps at the endpoints, acting as the interfaces, are sort of benefiting from the other combinatorial use cases that comes up with adopting UPI. So the revenue model is kind of very thin otherwise, but there's a whole new monetization areas where they benefit from. And banks as such don't charge too in the whole process. Yeah.
So we have two hands up. I think Daniel's hand went up first, and then Mei-Lin Feng after that. So go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Yeah, great presentation and lovely to hear about your initiative. But yeah, back to Beckn.
Yep.
Very interested in the decentralization, minimal, smaller platforms, interoperating federations. At what point does it fall down, or not? Can you take it to literally app to app or peer to peer? Can it be serverless? That's the question. Do you need some ID sort of like intermediary sort of doing some accounting or something like that, or some sort of a resolving server? Or
great question. Thanks. Thank you, Dan, for asking that. So Beckn sort of has its learnings from UPI, and it's probably like the next generation from UPI, where it's completely decentralized. So to your point, you don't need any resolution server or a router or a switch, anything in between. The interactions happen purely between two endpoints. Obviously, they would probably need a way to locate their sort of endpoints, API endpoints. So there could be some registry which could be barely static and cached. It's not like an intermediary of any sort, but just like a library catalog. Once you discover each other, the entire interaction is just between the two platforms, and both of them sort of maintain a record of that interaction, whether it's a search or actually placing the order and tracking it. But what Beckn does, and that's the thing about, if you're doing these protocols in this decade, it could be some of the things that you have to solve for is trust and other things. So what the protocol does, it allows you to sort of, at the time when you're placing the order, it allows you to actually place that order as a signed micro contract. So you can do dual digital signatures to sign it, so that tomorrow, when you place the order with another person, because you've never done business with that platform and you don't know what the credentials of the platform is, you do have a counterparty signed order. And this order is not just about what you bought and how many of the items did you buy. It actually in that contract, it captures the terms in which the order was accepted. For example, if the seller says, I'm going to deliver this in 4 days, and then this is the method of payment, and this is when I'll collect money, and is any kind of returns allowed or partial returns allowed? What is a refund guarantee? All those things are literally baked into that transaction, and protocol allows for that, and allows both parties to exchange and agree on that. So it's kind of like not exactly a smart contract, but more of a Ricardian contract, peer-to-peer, that solves for that. But it's purely peer-to-peer.
And can it just between two nodes? I mean, you talk about between platforms, but can it be between two apps? There is no necessarily a persistent connect, like 24-hour server involved. It's just two people, two mobile phones talking to each other.
You can, but
why you couldn't, yeah.
I mean, technically you can, but protocol has been written as a sort of a stateless server-to-server protocol, but you can have that server running out of your phone if that's all the computation it takes. I mean, just to give you an example, we have a startup in India which is instead of putting a grocery store, we have a lot of them in India, but about 5 to 15 million of them. We call them the Kirana shops. Instead of putting the grocery stores on their cloud, they moved cloud into the grocery store, which is like a barely 200 square feet kind of a shop. You have a Raspberry Pi server, and the complete control is with the shopkeeper to sort of add the fast-moving catalog items to that and connect to the network without having to be on any intermediary cloud. So you can pretty much control. So, and tomorrow, if you were to bring an IoT play into this, you can have a refrigerator search for milk and order for you even before you realize that there's no milk left. So I think that's sort of moving commerce to a network layers and keeping it purely peer-to-peer does obviate the need to have any kind of central player, including a routing switch in some sense. And so it creates this little good optimal ignorance way of engaging the two parties peer-to-peer with no any central persistence required.
And just a little bit, I just missed, what was the connection between UPI and Beckn? Were you in both or something like that?
Yes, I was involved more as a volunteer, but my co-founder, Pramod Verma, Dr. Pramod Verma, he's a computer scientist, pretty much the brain behind all the things that you're seeing in India, right from Aadhaar to all that. So he was part of the UPI design and the scale up. So a lot of this has come from his learnings of UPI and solving for commerce, but commerce is far more trickier and difficult than UPI because, in payments, you're moving digital product from one into another. Here, you have to also solve for the physical fulfillment of goods, services. So that's a whole new ball game, but at least to an extent, we can solve in the digital realm of things, and then offering some kind of a trust for the offline physical fulfillment is the way we looked at Beckn as sort of a different, but more evolved design from UPI.
Thank you.
So Malin's next and then Adrian.
Great.
Maylin,
Hi, everyone. In Palo Alto, but I was skiing, so that's from my recent skiing. Sujith, this is fantastic stuff. Just to follow on from the other one, what if that Raspberry Pi is burned up or lost or whatever? I mean, if it's all serverless, what's about backup? Just
of course.
curious.
Yeah, so clearly, if you're moving it to the edges, you got to have to deal with redundancy, persistence, backup. So those are some of the things that, of course, the startup is trying to solve for. You can probably record the copies in a local ledger on a desktop or something, or probably they'll do a data archival on a server somewhere. But the fact that in a Kirana store, which is open probably only from 9 to 9, and you're able to offer basic appliance support at some level with backup and everything. And if you can maintain mean time between failure of a Raspberry Pi significantly longer, the kind of economies that come with that is fascinating. You don't have to charge 15% commission in the pretext of paying for the big cloud costs and a whole lot of other costs. And you're literally solving for that little local unit of an economy. And if it's just 30, 50 items that I sell normally, I think a Raspberry does a better job than a big AWS. So I think it's a kind of a good economic trade-off to have a very localized lean infrastructure, but obviously factoring for any kind of discontinuity that comes with it.
Great. Here's my real question.
Sure.
Are you aware of GovStack? I've just put it in the chat, which is the UN Digital Building Blocks Initiative.
Yes, of
in
course.
Spirit
In fact,
India. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I'm the team lead on that for the market interactions. E-government marketplace is a working group that I'm a member of since October. Been working with the whole team back in Geneva, and I'm leading that team to create similar sort of a specifications for e-marketplace where government is one of the actors as a consumer, as a provider, or even as an enabler. So we're thinking of that in that model. We are looking at the specifications. It could become a protocol kind of a design as we arrive at it. We're still doing the early scoping, but that's definitely one of the clear possibilities that I see, because what it's trying to solve for is no different from what Beckn is trying to solve for. It's just
right.
that one of the actors there is a government party. So I'm pretty much involved in that discussion, but as one of the building blocks, not the entire Gov stack. And that's the e-marketplace building block.
Okay, I'd like to stay in touch. I'm on the advisory council for GovStack, and I see what you're doing in e-commerce as a bridge towards the international trade, digital building blocks that we'll start getting into with GovStack in the next couple of years.
That's fantastic. And a really exciting project. Looking forward to see how it shapes up. It's on the e-marketplace.
And I'd just like to mention that Mei Lin will be our speaker on April the 17th for this same series.
And she's a good person to have on your side, trust us. Adrian.
Hi. So one of the critical platform functions is managing reputation.
Yes.
And it seems that it is very difficult to decentralize this function in a way that's fair for everybody. Partly because reputation has to be contextual. You don't want to end up with reputation being like Chinese credit scoring that crosses contexts. So I'm curious, how does Beckn provide that component of a transaction, whether it's in the ride-hailing model or the Amazon shopping model?
Yeah, great. I think so. So in the last about 6 months or so, especially on the ONDC project, we've been thinking hard on sort of solving for reputation in a decentralized network. So there are two ways in which Beckn is presently adapting. Firstly, fundamentally, Beckn Protocol allows for ratings. What it means that if a seller is on a platform, let's say like any of these ride-hailing platforms like Uber or a platform like Amazon, whatever is the rating system, a reputation system, the platform natively has, it can sort of propagate that rating system onto another consumer platform where the user is actually rating, the consumer is rating, and through this peer-to-peer API exchange. So instead, just you define the terms of rating as a provider platform, and the consumer just gets it on their interface, which happens to be another platform, but you can enforce the same things on the others. It's just that you're changing the interface, but largely your system remains. So this is the basic layer where anything that the provider platforms, for example, whether it's Uber or a local taxi, a platform like Namayatri, whatever is that native rating system could be propagated through the protocol to the other side to receive whatever the scores and the feedback that you want to get. That's the basic foundational element as one of those rating APIs as part of the entire API specifications set inside Beckn. What we're also trying to do on top of that is to enable a rating system which is not native to the platform. The example that I was taking earlier, where if say a driver moves from one platform to another, or a food delivery agent moving from one platform to another, he may want to continue to be rated on the previous sort of a scoring system and use that for its own benefit and welfare while shifting platforms. For that, what we are trying to do is create the second layer of rating system, which is at a network level, not native to any particular platform, where that sort of the network as a body or as an informal collective. In case of ONDC, you have a formal institution of ONDC, which is a not-for-profit company as a utility enabling this. They have, in consultation with all the platforms and other experts, have come to create a network level reputation system, which then allows the network to sort of apply those ratings across all platforms. So you're no more just propagating a platform native ratings, but so anybody who's participating in the network now also have to follow like the ONDC score rating system and use that as an interoperable rating system for the end provider to move from one platform. So obviously, the nature of rating of an ONDC system could be very different from than the rating on Uber or Amazon individually. But the fact that you're trying to create a network level reputation kind of has its own value. Now, what should that rating system be? What should exactly score? What should be the ratables? Should it be the provider or the item being delivered or the service being offered or just the fulfillment part of that? There are a whole bunch of rateable sort of items, elements that are there in any interaction. All those things protocol provides for, but what exactly do you choose and what is relevant in the context of, say, food delivery vis-a-vis a ride hailing? Those are all very contextual selections that ONDC in consultation with those sectoral participants will take and implement. One of the things that they're exploring is to how do you persist this rating? Obviously, you need if you're doing a network level rating, you need to persist it at a network layer. So they're trying to see if they can bring in distributed ledgers to sort of persist it and make it accessible for all. And even again here, the system, the ledger and the posting and running the rating system is not necessarily done by ONDC itself. They are in turn looking at other participants, pure play rating service providers to come and offer those kind of rating services so that network participants in the transaction layer, like the buyer and seller platforms, are not logged in with one sort of a rating system. You have a choices of rating system which works on a common ONDC framework, but not necessarily the same provider. So what we are imagining this will create is, on one side, you can have specific ratings on food and other things, or some things you can also have not ratings, but other kinds of reputation system like badging services and a whole lot of other things that we can't even imagine today because the possibilities are quite high. So that it creates a new spur of innovation and add more value to the network in general, and everybody gets benefited from it more or less equally. So that's how you're thinking about rating system entry.
So let me just make sure, because I asked specifically about context. So
Yes.
in the model that you describe, Beckn is obviously the standards. Okay, fine. The content, they do not, Beckn doesn't establish a context.
Right.
But neither do you really need ONDC. In other words, if you don't want to have a single context for the entire,
Yes.
for all of India or the world, in the case of healthcare, for example, right?
Right.
So what you're saying is that the critical point, if I'm hearing you, is that for each context, you need a nonprofit, kind of like ONDC, with or without ledger components, of course, in order to do this. It's not ONDC itself that is the essential component. Beckn is essential, and then the people, the nonprofits that would establish the context per domain, per context. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, it is. It is just that I'm not too sure if it was always necessitates having a non-profit, because it could also be a market consortium coming together, like a GSM alliance or somebody trying to agree on a common sort of a specification that is in interest of pretty much all companies or majority of the companies. The fact that you can create your own rating system for a context that is of relevance is the key feature, but for it to be kept honest and equal for all to benefit from, maybe yes, you'll require sort of an independent a creator of that, not necessarily the network utility itself, but both companies.
Yeah, the reason I said nonprofit is because if the consortium, GSM or otherwise, is not completely transparent about
Yes.
how they're doing these ratings,
I agree.
so there can't really be much proprietary component if, right? In other words, we know that Twitter and whatever
Yes.
aren't transparent about how they do the things, and so that's why I jumped to the nonprofit. Though in fact, yes, it could be like you say.
Actually, I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
Michael Gross had brought up a question earlier, it's kind of scrolled off our chat here, that had to do, and maybe Michael, you can come in with it. It had to do with monetization. whether it could go to targeted ads.
Sure. Yeah, it was a little bit of a cynical aside, honestly. I mean, obviously, if there are intermediaries who are, using the UPI to at a loss, at no cost to the consumer, because they're going to be potentially getting them as well, they'll be getting them as members and potentially selling them other services, then I would think they could also, and maybe are, showing them ads. And I don't know what kind of rules about data retention there are in these transactions, but I could see how it could be very valuable and potentially abused. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take us down that cynical road.
No, but I think it's a great point. So on UPI, we don't see ads happening. I think India is probably, unlike America, was probably going from very little digital economy to a sort of leapfrogging to a very transaction-oriented economy, and probably not touching, getting deeper into ad-based economy, pretty much ad as a business model for many platforms to operate here. I mean, we are not big on the ad spends as an economy in India, if I were to compare that with the US. But that said, I mean, independent of that, India, I mean, I think UPI, we are seeing very little of that, because I think the good thing is that if you can have transaction economy deliver value, then you can probably avoid the urge and tendencies to go over an ad-based model. I'm not saying that therefore there will not be ads, but it sort of brings the whole value creation through transaction as a greater prospect than any kind of an ad-based economy. At least that's my reading from what I've seen of these UPIs. I think many of the apps barely have any ads. In fact, platforms like Google have resorted to some kind of an incentivization for spending more or using UPI more through little scratch cards and all that, but I haven't seen them bring any of their ad sort of engines into play on UPI. Even on Beckn, I think if it removes the friction on transaction economy, the way I think projects like ONDC sort of incentivizes participation is literally to be benefited from the transaction itself. So what could happen, let's say that you have these big apps, for example, like UPI apps, they have 300 million users on their platforms. And then you have these small businesses getting online through the provider apps. What could happen is that fact that you have reduced the cost of order acquisition for a small business online without having them to have their own customer acquisition and a whole lot of other costs on them. The buyer apps are sort of allowed to charge for a small amount of finder's fee kind of a model, which some of these small businesses and platforms are willing to pay, which is several orders lesser than a typical commission they would pay in a two-sided model as an intermediary, which is probably 15, 25%, or even upwards of 40%. So given that you have this model where we are looking at deepening commerce from moving from low volume, high value transactions that happens in that 7% e-commerce penetration that you're seeing, to kind of more of a high volume, low value sachetized transactions, like buying a packet of bread or buying anything like that, or buying a single ride. If you do that and if the volume goes up, I think that and create a competition of multiple sort of demand providing platforms participate, and given that everybody is fair on an interoperable network, everybody is sort of equal in how they interact with others with no nexus getting created, you have an opportunity to bring down the cost of these incentives, at the same time be lucrative enough for these platforms to come in and sort of stop the urges of going through an ad-based monetization. I mean, that's kind of an hypothesis that on which this whole projects are being conceived. Of course, there will be some bit of a regulatory embargo on privacy and this whole exploitation through ads and other things that may or may not happen. But the fact that the protocol allows for programming those policies and regulations sort of kind of gives you that vantage point to enable, disable, ban, or allow it limitedly. All those kind of combinations are available for the policymaker on the network.
Let me say something.
You're at the top of the hour.
Oh,
We can close it off and then we can stay.
hi. I want to say one thing and then we have to close it off for now, but we can go.
Just close the recording.
Yeah, we just closed the recording, but want to say something. First of all, thank you. This is an incredible presentation. But also I wanted to talk about something you just brought up about India having sort of the advantage of not having already gone down the path that we've gone down. It's like India can really show the way of doing it in a more decentralized, and you say more transactional, but basically this peer-to-peer e-commerce, which was the original idea of the internet, peer-to-peer, you know, it's like, luckily, India didn't go down the path of what we went down, because now there's an opportunity to show another way that is very much back to sort of the original idea. So anyway, I personally really want to thank you, and also you need to mention that you have the kind of resources for people who are technical. They have an online 8-hour course on how to be a Beckn developer and that kind of stuff, which you might want to bring up after we close the recording. But I just really want to thank you so much for this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here and be part of this conversation. I think it's a great opportunity to learn and see what, and obviously these are early days in the Beckn. We're not saying that we've figured everything out. We're still learning, and clearly commerce with the decentralization is a challenge if you look even at the physical fulfillment part of it and other things in place. But yes, I think it's a good beginning, and yeah, India seems to be there. I think it's been leapfrogging on many things. It's just leapfrogged desktops to mobile phones. It just leapfrogged payments from cards to mobile phones, and even commerce sort of has this opportunity to leapfrog with the kind of 6%, 7% penetration it has. So I think sometimes the weakness can be its strength, but also the fact that we are in a country where pretty much engineering is pretty much like a safety first choice, and you become an engineer and then figure out what else you want to be. I think that advantage of talent capital kind of also helps. So I think it's a great time to be in India. It's an exciting time, and the last 10 years have shown how I'll be calling it the tech aid, the technology decade of sorts in India. Leapfrogging India to a kind of a different way, but obviously there's long road ahead, a lot more to be done. There is still significant amount of disparity in terms of access and choice and all that, but projects like this we believe should get us there and some kind of create some sort of a balance till new problem emerges, I guess. But yeah, I think India has the advantage of having all the problems go through it and also have sort of a supply of talent capability, I would say this tolerance to ambiguity as a skill set that comes naturally for us to sort of think of possible designs like this. But yeah, but that's about India. You clearly see I'm very passionate about talking about it. But thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Doc.
Great.
Thank you. Don't
But don't go away. Don't go away. We're still
Sure,
here.
sure. Yeah, sure.